of you watching online, welcome. We're so glad you can tune in. Be sure to get your questions into our moderators, and if we can't get to them all tonight, you will hear back from us by email, we promise. But before we dive in, we want to start things off with a really special performance by Marie Metaphor Specht. Marie is an artist, poet, and an accomplished spoken word artist. She has 10 years experience as an arts educator in the public and private school systems. She strives to tell her stories in a way that embraces the commonality of the human experience, inviting each person to connect with the images and ideas in her work. Marie will reflect on the affordability crisis in British Columbia. She wants to leave you feeling warm, with a full heart, and pensively hopeful. Marie?
Hello there in internet land. A headline overheard. Millennials are causing a baby bust. Like we're conspiring to orchestrate the slow downfall of this country, like we are too selfish to acquire the selfless love required to rear children, like we are afraid of what it would mean to love someone so completely, so intensely, while living in a world on the very precipice of disaster. The equation is not that simple. It used to be meet the love of your life, acquire a great career job, buy a home, wait until you're financially sound, then have a baby. Or was it get a second job to chip away at student loans while volunteering to round out your resume in search of a career job, too busy to really date, so you Tinder the loves of your life again and again, all the while saving to buy a house to have the baby. Or maybe it's make sacrifices to pay off the student loans, then triumphantly move out of your parents' house so you can finally really start dating, hopefully meet the love of your life, move in together, only to pay exorbitant rent while saving for a home of your own to have that baby they keep talking about. Or, if you're like me, work hard to pay off student debt, meet the love of your life, move to an expensive city where you work that career job for a decade before having the baby despite financial instability.
Thank you.
Build a loving family home in a series of rented apartments, always a little bit too small. Fall in love with that expensive city, with the people, the art, the culture. Live with a little less. Live in joy. Your baby born of this rocky shore of these Arbutus and Sitka, born of this beautiful island. What we're really talking about is expectations, what it means to be successful. These choices are mine, and I am one of the lucky ones. I feel successful. My parents just can't figure out how their successful daughter with 2 degrees, 10 years into a respectable career, isn't willing to make the necessary sacrifices to own a home or a half-decent car. But I wouldn't take it that far. You see, the necessary sacrifices have changed since they made these choices. With 200% more student debt than our parents, we are half as likely to own a home than folks who were our age in the 70s. While anything that would shore up a stable life, housing, healthcare, childcare, education, have inflated to Macy's Day Parade-sized proportions, we find our salaries have remained mere children's party balloons. Does this metaphor infantilize us? Of course it does, because we are infantilized. More and more of us are forced to live with our parents well into our 20s, putting off many of the major milestones and responsibilities of adulthood. The boomerang generation. Many return to the safe harbor of their childhood home when we find we are poorly insulated against one of life's little surprises like job loss, underemployment, illness, disability, a breakup, run eviction. Could it be worse? Of course it could. Perhaps these expectations we were raised on are inherently flawed in their privileged view of the world. I'm happy to live with less because I'm happy to live here. I'm happy to live now. But that doesn't mean I'm not afraid for the future. Fear is the uninvited guest at our family dinners. He crashes on our couch and doesn't pay rent, whispering in my ear when I think about how poorly prepared we are. Should our luck change, how easily our careful home built of cards could come down around us. So for now, I'm one of the lucky ones. But this steadily increasing pressure is a trend, a lesson in progression and late-stage capitalism. There are fewer and fewer lucky ones unless we push against this tide. So we're frantically piling up sandbags. We're making life rafts of our love, crossing our fingers that this world on the precipice will have anything left by the time our baby is grown. Our baby, who is born of these rocky shores. Our baby born of love and making it work anyways. Making it work any which way. Our baby born of this beautiful island. Thank you.
Marie, thank you so much. That was beautiful. Really a wonderful thing to share with all of us. I'm sure we all could really relate to that. What I'd like to do now is invite the rest of our team up to the stage and pass things over to Dr. Paul Kershaw, the founder and lead researcher at GenSqueeze and a professor in UBC's School of Population and Public Health. And we'll have Eric Swanson come on stage as well.
Do you want us to be here? It's super exciting to be here. It's super exciting to have Marie here summarize so much of what actually happened today in the provincial budget. And I want to acknowledge how much talent it takes to actually capture in poetry the profound changes that we need to make in public policy. And I think you did that fabulously, admirably, so thank you. As a voice for younger, I'm not close enough. As a voice for younger Canadians, GenSqueeze is in the business of myth busting. There are these rubbish ideas out there that younger Canadians are lazy, and entitled, and more consumerist than most, and whiny. And those ideas just aren't true. Are we lazy? No, I mean, we go to school to train for jobs more than any generation has before. We're willing to work for thousands of dollars less than did people a few decades ago. We work years more trying to save for a down payment on a home that many will never get. And then our consolation prize is working many more months per year to pay the rent that goes up with rising housing prices. Are we entitled? No, that's not true either. If you look at how entitlements break down in Canada, we spend each year over $33,000 on important programs for my mom and my grandmother. We need to protect them. But let's be clear, by comparison, younger Canadians get way less spent on them. Less than $13,000 a year. Are we consumerist? Well, probably every Canadian could look in the mirror and ask ourselves, are there some things we just don't need to consume? But if you look at the folks who are buying the homes with the granite countertops and cruising around the planet on holidays, it tends to have a bit more of a gray tinge than I see in the room tonight. Are we whiny? Well, my sense of it actually is we tend to struggle with our hard work not paying off like it used to, too much in silence. We may talk with one another over coffee or wine and ask ourselves, what are we doing wrong in a quiet moment? But we haven't had a group in the world of politics for the last several decades advocating on behalf of our demographic like those 50 and older have had through the Canadian Association of Retired Persons since the mid-1980s. Until now. That is the purpose behind GenSqueeze, to bring another voice to the world of politics, to support investing in our parents and grandparents while also demanding that we get it right for their kids and grandchildren. Which is precisely why on budget days like today, we suit up and we go into the lockup and we dig into the details of the budget so that we can get out to the public right away an interpretation of whether or not younger Canadians are being prioritized. And then we bring it to our decision makers the next day. We're going to meet with the Green Party and the NDP Party and the Liberal Party to talk about what we saw. And we engage folks like you here in the room and out there in the internet world in a conversation about, did the budget today get it right? Because it's no small task. We live in the province where hard work pays off less than anywhere else in the country for younger people. No province has seen a bigger hit to full-time wages. No province has lost more control over home prices. And so we have to ask ourselves today, did the budget set us on the path to address those problems? No single budget's going to accomplish that, solving those problems in one single night. But the key thing is, did we set ourselves on a better path than we have been? And that's how we'll be evaluating the budget. And that's what we'll share with you this evening.
Yeah, so that is the big question of the evening. We want to know if it was beefy. Where's the beef? The question is it going to meaningfully influence affordability for young British Columbians?
Well, and I had to stand up today in front of too many cameras. I did say for the first time in over a decade, I could say with honesty that this is the first time I think younger British Columbians have a reason to really celebrate about a budget in many years. Again, it's not going to solve our code red affordability challenges overnight, but we made more progress in the budget today on major costs like childcare and housing than we have seen in some time. And I think that's worth getting excited about. We can talk about the really exciting, we can talk about where there's more work to be done, but at bottom, I think we need to be glass half full and be optimistic, and today's budget gives us reason to be so.
Okay, thank you for that summary, Paul. One of GenSqueeze's top issues that we work on is housing. It's why we launched our Code Red campaign in 2016. And the goal of that campaign is nothing less than to restore housing affordability for renters and for owners forever. GenSqueeze's executive director, Eric Swanson, is going to help us out here. So, Eric, how did the NDP perform on housing?
Well, as Paul mentioned, the NDP, have barely been in government for 8 months now. And this budget does put us on a much better course than previous governments. You ask the question, like, where's the beef? How beefy is this budget on housing? And there's a few different ways to answer that. If we set as our long-term goal restoring affordability permanently forever, that's a pretty high bar. Maybe this budget gets 5 or 6 beefs out of 10 beefs, but that's way better than one beef, of the previous government, which is fair to say they had to be dragged into housing action. And so this budget, and I can summarize some of the key takeaways, definitely is comprehensive. I've got kind of a printout here. It's a 30-point plan for housing in BC. That's a lot of points. It is comprehensive. It spans supply, demand, taxation, security for renters. So there is a lot in here, and there's definitely room for improvement. It seeks to stabilize housing markets, but stabilizing the market at 27 years to save for a down payment in Metro Vancouver, 16 or 18 years here in Victoria. That's not awesome news, objectively, so we need to go much further. So that's the main takeaway, is much better than the past. We're on the right track, but man, oh man, a lot more to do.
I am the communications professional at GenSqueeze, and so I get to hear a lot about what people are talking about on social media and get a lot of questions, and you get a lot of heat, and something that's top of mind for people.
Sorry about the heat.
It's okay. Something that's really top of mind for people is the amount of global capital that is being washed into our real estate market. It's been like gasoline on a hot burning fire. So, Eric, what is the new government doing to address this in the new budget?
Yeah, it's been a huge issue, and it's one of the things that the previous government tackled first, and maybe I'll just kind of frame it overall in terms of restricting harmful demand generally, including from global capital. We had an event here in Victoria back in November kind of pointing to not only Metro Vancouver being a problem with foreign buyers, but also here in the CRD with rates of foreign purchasing exceeding that of Metro Vancouver. So the good news in today's budget and in the comprehensive housing plan there are a number of things that the government is doing. First, they're introducing their promised speculation tax. Some people may have heard about this during the campaign. It targets speculators, both domestic and global, with an annual 2% tax, basically penalizing people for holding properties as investments instead of as a place to live. And so that will be an annual tax, and it will apply to global investors as well as domestic. The second thing, and this is exciting, we've been talking about this, is shoring up the foreign buyers tax. And so they're increasing it to 20% from 15%, and they're expanding it from just Metro Vancouver to here in the Capital Regional District. That's great. They're also expanding it to Nanaimo, the Nanaimo Regional District. A little known fact, Nanaimo's actually seen quite a bit of foreign investment as well. The Fraser Valley, Central Okanagan, all will now be, the foreign buyers tax will now apply to all of those regional districts. You know, something to keep an eye on though, as it's still not a BC-wide tax, are new spillover areas being created, Cowichan Valley, for example. And so that's something that the provincial government will have to keep an eye on. Nelson, yes, yeah, surprisingly. Or not so surprisingly. Another big thing on the global capital piece is that we don't know who owns a lot of real estate in BC. That's been a big part of the problem. Actually being transparent about home ownership in BC and who actually owns property. And this is where the plan is actually really strong. There's 6 or 7 measures to kind of crack down on crack down on tax fraud and cheaters and kind of bring home ownership or beneficial ownership into the light, I guess is a way to summarize it. And that's a great first step to cracking down more broadly on the effects of global capital, because we first need to know where that capital is in the market, if that makes sense. So they're doing a lot. They will be implementing measures to bring some of this global capital to light. Let's see, the next thing on just demand generally. Should I just keep going on demand?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So global capital, we've got the foreign buyers tax, expanding it in rate and in geographic scope. We're going to start capturing more of those foreign buyers as we kind of bring it into the light a bit more. And let's talk about short-term rentals. That's another hot topic too. Here in Victoria, the city has been leading on this along with the city of Vancouver. Unfortunately, a lot of the responsibility for cracking down on this type of harmful demand does lie at the local government level, and some municipalities have been struggling with that burden. It takes staff resources to figure out what's going on. So this new plan does include some measures on short-term rentals. First, they're actually going to charge tax, so that's good. Currently, short-term rental operators haven't been charging provincial sales tax, municipal tax, so it's good that we're now going to be charging tax. Municipalities will now be able to access some of that tax revenue for affordable housing too, so that's good. But there's one thing to point out here that's missing. It's kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but one of the big problems with short-term rentals is just enforcement. Local governments can come up with rules, but it takes a lot of time to ensure compliance. The provincial government could have gone one big step further to ensure that platforms like Airbnb only list units that are legal and permitted. So it's up to the company to ensure that only legal permitted units are listed. That would be the gold standard, and it's not in today's plan. So that's an opportunity for improvement. So yeah, any other
Supply.
supply? Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
We should talk about supply. Absolutely. On the supply side of things, last year the NDP pledged to build 114,000 units over 10 years, just like the BC Rental Coalition, which we are a part of, has been asking for. But it hasn't been super clear exactly how they're going to count these units or the priority approaches they'll take to get them built. So Eric, any updates there?
Yeah, some updates on this. I mean, the 114,000 number that was in the campaign as well, still not exactly sure where that number is coming from. It looks very similar to a number coming out of the BC Rental Housing Coalition, which is their projections of how many new affordable units we need to build within the next 10 years to kind of keep up with demand. But the BC NDP's number their rationale doesn't quite match that. So I'm not sure how they're going to be counting those units, but it is clear that they're focusing on rental, affordable rental, specific targeted funds of money for particularly vulnerable groups. There's a specific money for accommodation for women and children in need, Indigenous people and families, and so specific vulnerable groups. There's also talk of incentivizing purpose-built rental as a priority. So stable long-term rental. Developers will be exempt from property taxes. There's also going to be some mulling of rental zoning. So local governments can actually determine areas of the city that are just for rental, which is pretty cool. And local governments have been asking for that. They're doing some really smart things around student housing. There's been a really dumb rule in BC that has prevented post-secondary institutions from basically building on-campus rental housing. it gets super nerdy, but basically the previous government refused to kind of remove the barrier, and the NDP government, starting in the fall and in today's plan, kind of reaffirmed measures to make it easy for universities and colleges to build housing. So that will be really good, because if we can house students on campus, it reduces pressure in the broader market, right? So that was really good measure. And they've committed to, another thing that was kind of cool about this plan too, is they recognize that it's an all government thing, right? We need local government, provincial, feds, and so they're going to be reaching out to the federal government on the supply side as well, to see about incentivizing more rental.
Great.
Yeah.
Great.
Paul, anything to add there?
I think the one place that we would look to see more activity from the provincial government is they are investing in new housing, and they are investing in transit. And as they do that, it would make sense to encourage our municipalities to say, you want this money? Then show us you're open to adding the density required to actually price younger people back in. Make it kind of a condition, like to get the money, you need to actually act urgently. And that little incentive didn't get built into today's budget. Wouldn't have cost the British Columbia government anything. So I think it's a place that we'll continue to urge them to be a little more aggressive in the short term, because we really do need to restrict that harmful demand and think about adding in some of this important supply, especially purpose-built rental.
Yeah, and like you were saying, that was a hot topic in the lockup today,
That was a really
right?
that was a missing piece in the budget today.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why that's important is because there can be some NIMBYism around building much needed new housing, and so tying transit investments to kind of targeted goals for building units can kind of help overcome that. One other thing which I was talking to you about earlier was there is a little bit of money in here to actually determine how much new supply we need. You know, there's been years of talk about new supply being needed in BC, and GenSqueeze supports adding certain types of the right kind of supply, but it'd be really nice if those calls could be evidence-based and based on a needs assessment. And so the government is funding local governments to figure out exactly how much new housing we need, which is good. Yeah.
Well, that would be
Yeah,
very
data.
important.
that's great, right?
On that note, with all the new housing coming online, none of it is going to help young people if it's obviously all still priced out of reach of what typical people actually earn. So we know that many folks out there have been winning out on the housing lottery, big time, while so many others are losing and they're unable to buy homes or even be able to stay in their rentals. So on the housing side, how can we rebalance our tax system to better reflect this wealth imbalance?
Yeah, you know, Paul is doing a lot of great work for GenSqueeze, kind of modeling some of this right now. But I mean, going back to this like air graph of, you know, the housing costs are going through the roof, right? And incomes are really low and have remained low. It's air graph, it's good, it works. And you know, if we want, the NDP want to stabilize housing markets, but like that, this is still a huge gap. And there's been this huge bifurcation, divide in wealth created in BC, with a bunch of big winners and a bunch of huge losers in that kind of lottery. And so today's plan, you know, does have some measures to try to tax this housing wealth more fairly, including that speculators tax, going after, you know, people who own multiple properties, domestic and global. It has, of course, the expanded foreign buyers tax, and it's also got this kind of little entry into annual housing wealth taxation by targeting homes over $3 million and putting a little bit more property transfer tax on it when those sell, and also increasing the school taxes paid by owners of homes over $3 million. So that's like just a little nudge into that area, and we'd like the provincial government to do a lot more there. There's a lot to talk about there, but that's where this strategy loses some beefs. I guess, you know, it's not particularly bold on that front. We anticipated that, and there's a lot of work to do, because that, you know, tackling this huge wealth divide is going to be key to bringing housing costs back down and affordability back up.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thank you for all that, Eric. That was a great deep dive into what the BC government is doing for us on housing in their new budget. The second biggest thing that GenSqueeze has been paying attention to, second most important issue to us, is childcare. GenSqueeze got its start in family policy, and the $10 a day childcare plan has roots in GenSqueeze research. So, Paul, did the NDP follow through on their promise to deliver $10 a day childcare?
Yeah, the short answer is yeah. In terms of beef meter, in terms of scoring beef patties, I look at it in two ways. If you're looking at what was really doable in the next 3 years, this budget gets 9 patties out of 10. If you're looking at where we need to be in 8 years, this budget commits to doing 1/3 of the work and says it will keep going on, but we're going to need to make sure those other 2/3 of the patties over the next while keep coming up. So really strong grade for the short term, and we have to keep urging after year 3 that they show us the beef more and more. So here's what it looks like. When we were proposing the $10 a day recommendation a decade ago, and we were working with folks to not only come up with all the policy nuances, but how to convince British Columbians it was a good idea, we had to give it a label, kind of a sexy label that media would run with. And so that's why we labeled it the $10 a day campaign, because that was going to be the highest fee anyone was going to eventually pay after we implemented it in over about 8 years. So what we've seen in the budget today is the government moving the first 3 years towards achieving that goal. But the rub is, we never did suggest that you could pull off $10 a day childcare in 1 single minute, because you need more spaces. You need more people to work in those spaces. They need to have the education to do that well, and that takes some time. So here's what we were asking for in this budget, and here's what we got. We wanted in this year what would be the biggest investment in childcare in BC's history alone, $250 million. We got it. We wanted to see that grow by year 3 to $500 million. We got that too. And we aim ultimately to grow it by another $1 billion thereafter, and we seem on track to do it, so I'm going to hold out hope that this is signaling that we are well on track. With that money, we wanted to reduce fees for families, and we are going to do that in the relatively short term. Think about a single mom right now may earn around $45,000, has a toddler right now, pays about $1,200 a month for childcare. In a few years, that person's going to pay nothing. If you're a household right now with 2 kids, you make around 70 grand, you pay about $2,000 a month for childcare. In a few years' time, you're going to pay $100 a month. These are huge savings in the lives of our younger demographic, which makes sure that childcare no longer costs another rent or mortgage-sized cost. In the process of getting there, we need to build more spaces. We asked to get 22,000 new spaces in the first 3 years, and we got it. So these are all exciting things. But here's the rub. There are 2 little details, actually 3 little details I want us to be mindful of. Detail number 1, there's going to be more and more people wanting access to those spaces that are now subsidized. Some people are going to be lucky and get into them and start saving thousands of dollars a year. Some are not. And those who are not are understandably going to be frustrated. And yet, we need as a society, we need as a province, we need as a demographic of young families, either raising young kids now, maybe wanting to have young kids, to some degree to cut some slack. Like, we just need to be patient when we roll out a new program. It takes some time to actually build enough spaces. And so, if we are some of the people who aren't lucky enough to get that spot, I ask you to be a bit patient and know simultaneously we will be pushing on the provincial government to implement the changes as fast as is possible. Little wrinkle number 2. In order to have good quality childcare, we need to have well-trained folks, and they deserve a fair payment. Too often in this province, we've been paying childcare workers less than parking lot attendants. They do not get pay equity level wages. Effectively, childcare workers have been subsidizing parents who already have to pay rent-sized fees, but it's only made possible by childcare workers making limited wages. So we called for a plan that would start to raise the wages of early childhood educators to get to what we do for grade school teachers. And there aren't as many details in today's budget as we ultimately need to showcase that we're going to get to those pay equity level wages for childcare providers. But I'm hopeful, yes, we should be sad about that. That is not good. But I'm hopeful that the finance minister in her remarks today did mention that compensation was important, and so it's on their agenda, and I will bring it to the Ministry for Children and Family Development literally tomorrow. And last but not least, right now, if we were to end with the plan that is talked about in 3 years, you would have a different fee for different people according to how much they earn. You might think that's okay, except we don't do that when you go to the doctor. You don't do that when you go to grade school. What we do is to say, hey, if you earn more, if you have more wealth, then you'll pay more in taxes. But when you go to the doctor, you go to school, you have the same fee as everyone else. It's kind of important for building political will and having everyone sort of buy into public services. And unfortunately, there's a little risk right now that we're kind of building childcare in a slightly different way. I think their goal is to not do that, but right now we don't have enough details, and that's one of the little alarm bells going off in my head that we'll be mindful of, that we want to fund childcare like we fund schools, like we fund medical care, and so that will be one of the things we call for going forward. But all said, 9 patties out of 10 for ranking what happens in the next 3 years.
Thank you, Paul. Well, so in tying that to our next topic,
Oh, that's me too, is it?
traditionally poor performance on childcare funding is reflective of federal and provincial governments not investing equally in people of all different ages. So this next part, we really want you guys to follow me on this because it's super important.
Follow.
It's important to stress that this is very natural for older generations to be invested in more in some ways. Of course, we want governments to adequately invest in the health of our aging family members. We don't want anything taken away from them. That's what we really want to say here. But also, some of this government spending reflects a political and a cultural reluctance from governments of all stripes to actually invest in young people. So, Paul, on that note, how would you interpret the BC NDP's budget in investing in younger generations?
Yeah. Well, you might think that if you were coming here today and you heard on the radio, you might have heard people talk about childcare was the big thing or housing was the big thing. And they are big things in the budget, but they are not the biggest. And the biggest is something I'm just going to hold out for a moment and get to, but I just want to hold out for you. There's something bigger than those two things in terms of where new money went. And to understand that, I want to just put budgets in context. We can't really judge this 2018 budget all on its own. We have to understand sort of how budgets have been going over the last many years and decades. And so it might surprise you to know the following. This is going to sound wonkish, but it's important. Today, governments collect about $11 billion more than they did when my mom was a young woman. And my mom's online. Hi, Mom. So they collect $11 billion. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. It depends how much more we spend. We spend an extra $36 billion a year on medical care alone for my mom's demographic. Good stuff, because my mom needed to go to the doctor this week. But that left about $25 billion not paid for by new taxes. So you want to know how we paid for those things? We spend about $20 billion a year less on things that matter for younger people, and we grow the debts for younger people. Now that's not such a good generational deal. And the question is, did today's budget carry on with that tradition? And the answer is, to some degree, yeah. The greatest spending priority actually went to the thing that my mom's demographic most wants, which is more money for medical care. It outpaced the spending on younger people at a rate of almost 2 to 1, even though I just told you we had historic investments in childcare, and even though we've done new important things on housing. And so, it's not necessarily a problem. The problem is, though, we never as a society talk about it because no government ever reports on it. They don't break down how spending and revenue plays out by age, so we never have our legislators say, hey, are we striking the right balance between investing in young and old alike? And that matters because you may not know, but the most recent research shows that people under 45 in this room each year are spending 50 to 60% more of their taxes on medical care for their aging parents and grandparents who they love by comparison with what their aging parents and grandparents paid as young people when they were needing to support their elderly parents. We might be willing to pay more and more taxes. It sure would be easier if we earned more money than we do, but nope, we earn thousands less than in the past. It sure would be easier if we didn't have to pay so much for housing, which has gone up so much more than it was in the past. We need to have that more comprehensive conversation about age trends in our budget, which is why GenSqueeze time and time again says, do something that costs you nothing, governments. Just start reporting in your budgets how your revenue and spending trends play out by age so that we can monitor whether this city, this province, and this country works for all generations. And that's one of the messages we will bring to legislatures of all the parties starting tomorrow.
Is that everything for the age gap, Paul?
I think we want to, I want to leave time for questions and whatnot. Yeah.
I think that would be a good time for it. We may have a couple questions that have come in through our online participants. So our lovely and talented GenSqueeze supporter, member, and volunteer, Jordan, is going to ask some of the questions to our
Perfect.
panelists here.
So we have a couple questions. We might not be able to answer them right now because they seem to
The first
surround
one is from Sue Kershaw. We
enforcement.
have to put her back in the line.
Sure.
Sorry, Mom.
The first one here is from Sunil.
Okay, it's okay.
And they're curious about how the speculation tax will affect people with secondary houses in BC, but have their primary residence in another province.
Oh, that's interesting. You know, some of the details about the exemptions for the speculation tax have yet to be released. In the basic messaging delivered from the province today, principal residences will in most cases be exempt, but in this case, if the principal residence is outside of BC, then you might expect the speculation tax to apply. However, part of the design feature is that if you pay income tax in BC, and so if they work and pay income tax in BC, they can essentially deduct that or get a rebate against the speculation tax.
Yeah, can I just add to that? I mean, at bottom, the speculation tax is trying to do this really basic thing. If you have housing wealth here, but don't pay much in income taxes here, you're kind of evading contributing. And so the speculation tax is saying, if you have housing wealth here, we're going to capture that. If you already pay income taxes here, then we can offset that. But if you're not paying income taxes here, then we're going to capture our contribution from you. That's what the speculation tax is mostly trying to do. Eric's right. They don't have a lot of the details worked out. They've said they're going to try and refine that in the months ahead. And I don't know if that particular example will be caught as a sort of left out, or if it appropriately should be captured. And there's lots of people probably in this room who don't have any home that they own. And if you have a second home as a vacation spot, I'm not sure that we shouldn't actually factor that into our calculation of how much you can contribute to pay for medical care. Right now it's not factored in, but it doesn't strike me as a bad idea.
Perfect. And the second question is probably of the same stream. It's how does the government determine how to apply the speculation tax?
Yeah, probably similar answer there. They haven't released all of the details, including all of the exemptions. But the primary purpose, as Paul was mentioning, was to target people who own multiple properties, non-principal residences, and who do not pay income taxes in BC. This would include people who hold properties vacant, so there's some overlap with vacant homes taxes like Vancouver is experimenting with. And it also includes so-called satellite families, so people who have a large global wealth but don't report any income tax in BC, kind of like the students living in multi-million properties. So like those sorts of things would be captured and taxed as well.
Yeah, they're going to make it easy for the vast majority of British Columbians to have to fill out a few boxes and effectively then be left alone. That's their intention.
Is that it for the online questions? Great, awesome. So, yeah, we would like to take some questions from our audience. I saw this hand go up first.
Front row
And
here.
what we're going to do is Jordan's going to be so kind and deliver it just around to the front here, and that's where we'll have our first question. Thank you so much, Jordan.
Thanks.
What's your name?
My name is Brent May. I live in Vancouver. I heard today on the radio that they may have scrapped that $35,000 first-time home buyers line of credit that the Liberals introduced maybe just last year. I'd just like your thoughts on what that is going to achieve.
Sure. Well, Paul can supplement me here, but as far as the plan goes, they're promising to revisit that in conjunction with revisiting their promise with that $400 renter rebate. I'm not sure if some of you may have remembered that. That's not in here. They're not promising that $400 renter rebate, but they want to revisit that and kind of try to get the balance, try to achieve a better balance between kind of homeowners and renter benefits there. When the BC Liberals announced that first-time home buyers grant, we were very skeptical of it because it essentially just heats up demand and encourages first-time home buyers to pay more, even more, and essentially transfer more wealth from them to the home seller, predominantly in an older demographic.
Yeah, so I think we have ultimately said right intention. It's right to want to help people get into the housing market. That was a good aspiration. It was a poor execution, and so I think that it does make sense for the provincial government to continue to revisit it. I think most of the experts have encouraged them not to do it, and let's find a different way to continue to try and invest in renters and think about how to help some people still crack into that housing market as a potential owner.
Yeah, a better approach would just be to help rein in costs
Yeah.
overall, rather than try to help people jump into escalating costs, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Jordan, I think our next question was down in the front.
Hi, my name is Emma, and I was wondering if the government gave any indications of how they will prioritize those first childcare spots. As you mentioned, it's going to be quite controversial, like who gets them? How are they going to do that?
Yeah, great question. With the details that are available, they've done two things that I think are wise. First, they're targeting the vast majority of their fee support to lower income households in the short term. So when dollars are scarce, they're saying lower income households ought to get priority for accessing that cash. And so if you're a household with making less than $45,000, that's where you're going to see the biggest chunk of investment into childcare. But across the board, there are also fee reductions regardless of people's incomes. And the biggest fee reductions are going to go towards infant toddler care. And they did that because that's the most expensive. Oftentimes, infant care for infants, it can be $1,500, $1,600, $1,700, $1,800, and so they promise across the board a $350 reduction, while they're putting in additional fee subsidies for household incomes it'll up to $74,000-ish, $78,000. I have to go remember the details, but that's sort of the income threshold they're most trying to help in their first years.
Any other questions?
Yeah, great.
And then we'll get to the
We
back.
should get to the back.
Hi,
Tell us your name.
my name's Stefan, and you guys mentioned something about a $3 million cutoff for a tax break or a different tax bracket for the property transfer tax or something
Right.
like that. Well, doesn't it make sense if that number is lower, since the range, the volume between 1 million and 3 million is probably the highest rate of turnover for these houses? Like that $3 million mark doesn't seem like it would generate a whole lot of excess.
Excellent observation. Yes, it would make a lot of sense to revisit that whole spread between $1 million and $3 million. Yeah.
But to be fair to the government, there
It's
is
a good first step.
on the
Yeah.
property transfer tax, they already do have tax rates that get at, the 1 million, 2 million, 3 million level. They're just jacking the rate up a couple percentage points for the higher, pretty much mansion.
But on the annual basis, which is like the school tax.
On the
yeah.
annual basis, they're not capturing very much at all, and so in the weeks ahead, GenSqueeze is actually going to take a foray into that area and put out a new paper, some new proposals for the province to consider to think about doing it more comprehensively.
Yeah.
Hi.
Tell us
Can
your
you hear me?
name.
Hi, my name's Rebecca Merzero. My question is about the notion of generation-based analysis for budgets that you finished on, Paul. The federal government has recently committed to gender-based analysis of budgets. So I'm wondering if you have any plans to lobby federally for this change, and if you expect any receptivity to that, and also if you know of any jurisdictions around the world where this is already happening.
Paul's very excited to talk about this.
Wow. Did somebody set her up with that question? That's such a good question. So there's a longer story. I'd love to talk with you after that, but we have a wonderful GenSqueeze advisory board member here named Nancy Singh, who's really taken the lead over the last year to ramp up some of our government relations work at the federal level on this very issue. And you're right, there is a commitment, and our Prime Minister really deserves praise for this, a real commitment to gender-based analysis at the federal level, which has created this interesting window of opportunity for us to say, hey, while you're looking at gender power imbalances, why don't we add in a range of other things, including age? And so we do have a group of MPs increasingly thinking in that way. We have one leader in Ontario, is an MP, Nathaniel Erskine-Smith, who's sort of been our champion on the Hill. And as we speak, we'll have the federal budget next week. We're going to be going into the lockup, and we'll do our work there. And then Nathaniel is aiming to bring together a group of 8 or 9 MPs who are in the kind of younger age category to grow a bit of a champion across parties for this goal of actually integrating an age analysis into federal budgeting, with the hope that by 2019 we can convince the finance ministry to start doing that.
It should be an easy ask, or
Doesn't-
hopefully we should get that, because Paul and his research lab, they've already developed the methodology, they've done the hard work. It's just a matter of getting them to take the baton.
Thanks to Nancy for leading some of that work. How are we doing time-wise?
My name's Matt. I've got a question regarding what we're talking about today is a lot of financials. What we're looking at is a budget. It's all financials. What I want to know about is I'm a type 1 diabetic. I'm also bipolar. I look at this budget and I ask, where are the social programs? Where's the medical? I see the medical. I see the lowering of the MSP. But where's the help for the young people? Where's the help for people with mental issues? I don't see it. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as where's the help for young people, Paul was pointing out that this budget, although including a couple of key important policy leaps forward on childcare as well as on housing, with a lot more room to go, continues this interesting and worrying trend of an age gap in public spending. And so I know we can get caught up in the numbers, but it's an interesting place to start because the numbers are reflective of an overall prioritization. And so I think the old government got kicked out partially on the experience, the lived experience of people in BC where things have become so desperate on any number of fronts: housing, childcare, the fentanyl crisis, and a number of interconnected areas. And so I think, in the time that this government's been in power so far, and with this budget today, we are starting to see them go down the right road. We just need to encourage them to do more.
Mm-hmm. And I would just put on my School of Population Health hat. That's my day job at UBC, and remember that there's decades and decades and decades of science that says health doesn't begin with healthcare or medical care. Health begins in the conditions into which we're born, we grow, we play, we work, and we age. And if our budgets disproportionately say, we don't really have a lot of enthusiasm to invest in those conditions to promote health and well-being, but we'll really invest a lot in treating illness after we've actually let people become sick in the first place, that's an inadequate way to actually spend our cash and to promote dignity. Sure, it's great to show dignity when someone gets sick, to be willing to do as much as we possibly can in a doctor's office or in a hospital, but we would show even more dignity if we made the investments that science shows actually could prevent people from becoming unwell in the first place. So that's why we make these observations. And if we want to address some of the mental health issues in British Columbia, then we need our governments to acknowledge no province right now tolerates hard work not paying off as much as we do here in British Columbia. Just think about the stress that comes when we're earning thousands less despite going to school more, to then land jobs that don't have extended health coverage and other kinds of benefits that allow us to save for retirement, to then pay rents that are going up and up and up, and the dream of home ownership gets crushed, and then we get critiqued by parents that say, why can't you do that? These are the kinds of things that contribute to a growing anxiety, a growing stress, and then that can then bubble into other problems that are more serious still. And so we need to find the right balance between investing in treating illness via our medical care system and ultimately investing in the conditions that we're born into. We grow, play, work, and age because that's what makes us well. And that is one of the key lenses that GenSqueeze brings to our work on Budget Day, encouraging us to say, great, Canadians define ourselves in part by having medical care when our neighbors to the south don't. But let's also define ourselves by making sure we do all we can to prevent people from becoming unhealthy in the first place. Can you speak more into the mic?
My name's Keir Portress, and I'm a master's student at UVic, and I was just wondering, what's GenSqueeze doing about the amount of student loans that students and young people actually have? Because I've heard it lots where, we have more student loans as a generation than the ones before us. I understand that's partly due to everything else going up, but I'd just like to hear what you guys are. I guess
student loans? Okay.
Yeah.
You want to take that,
Do you
Paul?
want me to take that? Yeah, so we routinely monitor post-secondary education spending. One of the things that we point out is one of the key drivers for spending more on medical care is that we have an aging population. Millions more people who are in my mom's demographic over 65. You bet that's going to drive more spending on medical care. but so should the fact that we had many millions more people go into post-secondary, and that hasn't driven the same kind of commitment to invest more in post-secondary. And as a result, since 2001, for example, BC's reported the highest increase in post-secondary tuition of any province in the country. In addition to that, though, we focus on that. We say, but people can incur debt when they go to post-secondary, not only because of the sticker price they pay for tuition, but also in terms of what's their cost of living and how much can they earn. And so I do think we can give credit in this budget today to say there was a real effort made to tackle housing issues for students, in part by investing on more housing on post-secondary campuses. And there is a commitment to slowly, not quickly enough, raise that minimum wage. And those two things actually will really help mitigate some of the factors that drive up student debt levels. We still, though, however, can say, let's not see tuition rise anymore because that's already happened enough, and now we need to stabilize that. Because post-secondary allows you to outcompete those who don't have it when getting a job, but it sure doesn't pay off like it did decades ago.
And I think it's interesting to observe too, Paul, back to your previous comment about this 20, 30-year trend where governments are now spending or collecting $11 billion more, but spending $30 billion more, and that gap, and medical care eating up so much more of that. And where does the trade-off come? It comes from areas like post-secondary education and housing and childcare. So.
It looks like the data suggests it's come most from post-secondary.
That's right, yeah.
Cool.
Oh, and there's also over here to the person managing the mic for us.
Cool. I was just wondering about
Tell us your name.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, my name's Ashley. I was wondering about, I know you guys talk about environmental debts that we have as a younger generation, and what came out of the budget that we can see around the environment. Specifically, I would love to hear about BC Hydro and if they have put any money into demand side management stuff. I know that that's like fairly specific, so if you can't talk to that specifically, I would love to hear on a general any of the environmental debts that we have.
Yeah, you were in the lockup and heard the speech. I didn't crack into any carbon pricing or any of the energy stuff. So
yes, that didn't actually receive much attention in the budget lockup today. I think it's noteworthy that the carbon tax price level is going up, but that's largely been mandated by the federal government, and so we see the provincial government living up to its commitment. One of the things that we monitor at GenSqueeze is, consistent with the idea that comes from environmentalists, like, let's raise revenue for governments by taxing more what we don't want, like pollution or high housing prices, and let's potentially tax less what we do want, like earnings going up. And one of the things that we saw is that even though BC's made the first foray into carbon taxation, we still collect less than 2% of our total government's revenue from pricing carbon. And with the changes that we're going to see over the next 2 years, it'll go to 2.7%. So we're not really living up to that idea, like, let's start actually raising our revenue by pricing what we don't want, like pollution, and moving away from raising revenue based on other things. That'd be one thing. You asked about hydro.
Well, it's just an interesting point, actually, on the demand management piece, right? Because, part of the intergenerational story is an inheritance of debts, intergenerational debts, fiscal debts, environmental debts. In a recent example, a controversial decision taken by the NDP was to approve the Site C Dam, the largest, most expensive infrastructure project in BC's history, right? That stands as an example of a potentially large intergenerational debt. And so it's an interesting question you raise about the priority that the current government is placing on. It's kind of like taxing pollution, or kind of taxing demand, or focusing on the demand piece a little bit more. Nothing in the budget today.
One last observation on the environmental front is we've been calculating. Imagine we started heeding scientists' advice about the risks of climate change back several decades ago. Like the year you were born. That would have allowed us to phase off carbon at a much more gradual rate, and it would have been easier to do. Had we done that, and imagine 2050 was sort of our endpoint to like being below 1.5 tons per year per person in BC and across the country, we would be at about half of our carbon footprints per person in Canada that we are now. But we didn't do that. And so we have so much more urgent work to do in the next couple of decades, which means it's so much more challenging to pull off, and we have to pull that off while also incurring higher costs dealing with way more severe fires and way more severe floods. And already we have vector-borne diseases coming up into places they weren't before, and those add costs on top of having to adapt and move away from carbon. And so that environmental debt we've quantified is literally twice as big for young people today than it was when you were born.
Yay.
It doesn't need to be that way.
Yeah, where's an aircraft for that, right?
So, Jordan, I think we can take one more question, and then we'll get to
Hi.
the end of the program. Hi.
Hi, I'm Christy, and I'm probably pretty classic generation squeeze. I went to university, me and my husband, at the same time as we lived in student housing and paid for childcare. Graduated with huge student loan debts, got priced out of Vancouver market, came here, just got into the housing market last year. We felt like we were running on the train and like grabbed on and got on. And what I'm wondering about is there, as I see this real intention, we're finally at the place where we're earning income, we have a house, we have an asset, but we're carrying significant debt. So as we see the housing prices over a certain amount, we're seeing housing, there's beginning to be taxed, we're seeing income being to be taxed at a higher rate. Is there the potential for us to get even more squeezed by having our assets be taxed when we're carrying these debts and not acknowledging sort of the debts that our generation has had to incur for people who are, I think, at the front end of generation squeeze? And is there a danger for our, like, we watch it and we're worried that we're going to start getting squeezed even more as these kind of measures come into place? I'm wondering what you think about that.
Yeah, great question. Want to tag team that one?
Yeah, you want to go first?
So yeah, that's a super problematic situation because the crisis has been allowed to grow so out of control that if you do just claw your way into the market, you're in this increasingly precarious state where you've kind of maxed out your kind of lending potential, and now you're super concerned about that home equity going down potentially below the size of your loan, in addition to all these other costs. I mean, what was in the housing plan today does not target you for taxation on the housing wealth front, and that's something that going forward as we look to target or tax housing wealth more fairly, you would not be the household that we're looking to tax. In fact, some of the modeling that Paul's doing would be looking to lower the income taxes your household pays, partially funded by taxing the housing wealth of people who potentially have owned their home outright for a long time and no longer owe a mortgage. But that exact scenario is one of the trickiest pieces as we try to get this housing market under control, is making sure that we're not penalizing people who have been encouraged for decades and now just managed to, claw their way in.
Yeah, just the last observation on that is that for those in the room, myself included, have clawed into the housing market. I mean, one of the things that I think GenSqueeze is saying is being in the housing market can't do for our savings what it did for our parents and grandparents. Because what it did for our parents and grandparents has made it so much more challenging for their kids and grandchildren and is ultimately unsustainable for those who walk in our footsteps. And so we need to think differently about how we're going to save for our retirement into the future than just simply hoping that home prices are going to go up faster than the economy grows. Because that is just a pattern that dooms those who come afterwards. And so it's asking GenSqueeze to make yet one more adaptation. Yeah, we have to work more to pay our rent. We have to work more to save for a home. We have to be willing to work for less. We have to be willing to go to school more to work for less to then pay more for homes. We're making a lot of adaptations. We're willing to live in homes that are smaller, further from where we work, often with, maybe not having a car like people did in the past. We were adapting left, right, and center, and we're actually at GenSqueeze asking us to adapt again by saying, let's figure out how to save for our retirement in a way that's more sustainable than our parents and grandparents have done by relying on their home equity. I'm sorry for that additional ask. But while we make that additional ask of our demographic, we are strident in going into the world of politics and saying, politicians, you must meet us part way in adapting with us. And that is the kind of message we bring day in and day out in the world of politics, municipally, provincially, and federally. And we will continue to do that tomorrow and in the weeks ahead.
So to ensure young British Columbians can actually afford suitable homes, whether they're renting or owning, to ensure they can afford to raise families, to ensure governments are prioritizing young people to the same extent they prioritize the aging population, we need to continually strengthen the voice of young people in politics. That means voting. That means running for office. But for many of us who are squeezed for time and energy, it means having an organization that's got your back. We can push for those things when you're too busy taking care of your own life. GenSqueeze is that organization. We're a voice for young people in politics and in the marketplace, supported by cutting-edge research. You can support us by becoming a monthly member. You can visit gensqueeze.ca/join, or you can stop by the laptops at the back if you would like to sign up there. We want to give a huge thanks to everyone who came and joined to participate here at Sunset Labs. We want to thank everyone online for participating, and yeah, a huge thanks to Jason and Stream of Consciousness for giving us this amazing opportunity.
Thanks, Jason. Just one quick thing, Lindsay. On your point of membership, our membership is pay what you can. Who can maybe pay what they can to become a member of GenSqueeze? Hands? Hands? Awesome. So yeah, see the folks at the side. There's laptops, and please, yeah, consider going home tonight. GenSqueeze.ca/join, becoming a member, and paying what you can, whatever you can. Thank you.
Have a great evening, everybody. Cheers. Actually, and thank you, Lindsay, for all of the organizational work.
And thank you, Marie, for such a wonderful performance at the beginning.
Yes.
So if you're in the room and you want to stick around and chat more,